Good evening, today we have a Should You Talisman episode on the F2A-3 Buffalo. Once again, we are climbing through the ranks of the US tech tree as we go through my many talismans over the years that Gaijin have given me, and we're now moving on to rank 2s. So, as per usual, in the description below, if you want to skip ahead to the test flight, the weaponry, armor, etc., and of course the competition and conclusion, please do feel free to do so using the description below. Without further ado, let's get in and discuss the weaponry, armor, and mobility. I'm going to call it mobility, or even though it's more like overall performance of the F2A-3 Buffalo. So, of course, we've not actually featured a Buffalo in this series, and, well, this is going to be one where we go into a little bit more detail, because this Buffalo, whilst it is in theory better, I personally prefer the F2A-1, but we'll get into that. So starting out with the engine, we have the Wright Cyclone R1820-40, which has 1000 horsepower on 100% and 1180 on web, which is more than enough for 2.3. It's not obviously going to be the top dog in terms of that, but it's more than enough. And personally, the plane's performance is very acceptable. It has a decent enough climb. Its overall speed is doable for its BR, and it can definitely compete quite reasonably well with quite a lot of the aircraft that you're going to be coming across in the 2.3 bracket. Once you start hitting some of the 3.3 planes, though, this plane does start to show its age. Although, that being said, me and Harry have uptiered this plane every so often, and we do get some good runs out of it, but obviously the raw performance is just not there for it at those sorts of higher BRs. Going over to the weaponry, we do have a twin 50 cals up here with 250 rounds, and then of course we have the wing guns with 400 rounds. So these guns will run out quicker than these ones, and you will notice the burst mass drop off quite significantly when it comes to that, and that can hurt, but obviously that's why we're going to be tuning this aircraft with the belts to make sure we get as much out of the plane as possible. Now, luckily, this thing doesn't have a lot in terms of internal modules to really worry about. It does suffer from fuel tank fires quite easily, even though they are self-sealing. This thing dies to fires very easily. The engine is very vulnerable to fires as well, so this is something to consider. And as you can tell, there is no armor protection on this aircraft, so if you get hit, you are probably going to suffer some critical damage, or at least damage to the point that really affects this aircraft's overall handling and or performance. This can hurt its ability, and obviously it's quite unusual that it doesn't have the armor plating, but, well, that's just what happens, unfortunately. As I say, though, the plane's performance and overall handling is really good. This plane's quite maneuverable, but of course it does have the flaws of a very vulnerable engine, which is rather fragile, and of course the fuel tanks being extremely vulnerable to fires. Going into the armament in terms of belts and, of course, secondary weapons, I would personally recommend the ground target belt. It has the most armor piercing, which, whilst it doesn't have an incendiary round, the Tracer basically acts like a baby incendiary round, so there is that. But this will be more than enough to do the job. It's one of those that can definitely help out, but of course, fires aren't going to be too common. If you want fires, you probably want to try the Omnipurpose belt for a bit more incendiary content. But personally, I prefer the ground belt just because it's a bit more versatile when it comes to it. Now, the Buffalo can carry a couple of bombs. These are 200-pound bombs. I've covered these bombs far too many times. I'm not even going to bother mentioning them. But pretty much, these are just your stereotypical average bombs. They do drop single on this aircraft, so that does help it out, and can definitely give it some extra ground attack potential if needed. But they're only 100-pound bombs. I wouldn't expect, shall we say, you to kill a mouse with these. I mean, if you can, good on you. But personally, these bombs are extremely weak for 2.3 areas, and should be only used on light targets, let's put it that way. Without further ado, let's get into a test flight so you can have a look at how the aircraft performs and, of course, how it handles. See you shortly. And welcome to the test flight. Let's get this thing in the air. Now, with carrier launchers, they can be a bit buggy, so I'm having to use the rudder manually here, because for some reason, the carriers are really weird. Like, you don't get your catapult launch till now, which is weird, but that's just how Gaijin does things, I'm afraid. But, well, that's just what it is. So, the overall performance of the aircraft is what you'd expect for an early monoplane. Like, it's kind of like a Hawk in its raw performance. But of course, where this thing excels is its maneuverability. Now, of course, with the bombs on, it's a little less maneuverable. But it's quite maneuverable, but it's not as maneuverable as the F2A-1 or something like a B239 in the Swedish tech tree. Well, I say that, that's a Finnish Buffalo, but you get my point. This thing is very capable in what it can do, but the problem is that if you meet a B239, it pretty much beats this thing so hard. Now, of course, in terms of performance, you're pretty equal, but it's the fact that this plane just doesn't have that maneuverability that that vehicle gets, and you will definitely feel it when it comes to it. But the overall performance, and of course, having quad 50s at 2.3, definitely does help it out. Now, of course, landing flaps are a luxury on this thing, and trust me, they will boost your turn rate to the point where you can actually keep up with a B239. But don't leave them down too long, otherwise you are going to regret that. As you can see though, whilst it is not the fastest in terms of overall performance, it is good in a lot of areas. Obviously, it is an aircraft that has flaws. It's always had flaws. But it's enough to the point where you can go, yeah, this plane can do a lot of work. And of course, it's maneuverable enough to get in dive bombs quite easily. And, well, its elevator response is really good, so you can easily pitch this thing up quite nicely and drop your bombs right on target like so. And heck, you can even take out light targets like pillboxes, light tanks, and, well, if you're playing naval, you can even bust up a gun or two on a turret. Very useful skills to have in a plane. But of course, as I say, don't expect this thing to be like dominant in terms of performance. This thing's more of a get up close and personal, have a bit of fun. That's what this aircraft's meant for, and it can definitely do that. But like I say, if you're expecting something that can be quite a bit of fun, this plane is definitely that. Anyway, let's get into the hangar and let's go over this aircraft's competition. See you shortly. And welcome back to the hangar. So this is where we're going to be jumping into some rank 2 vehicles that I'd personally prefer talismaning over this. And well, some of this should be pretty obvious. Whilst I do like the F2A-3, I personally think the F2A-1 is a superior aircraft. It just feels better to fly in terms of its overall characteristics. But of course, it does trade a little bit of firepower, but the extra maneuverability is what really helps it out. And given that USA tends to fight Sweden a lot of the time, B239s are very dangerous and they have the firepower of the F2A-3. That's how I feel about it anyway. So coming into rank 2 vehicles, we do have quite a lot that I would personally prefer talismaning. And yeah, it is down to personal preference, but I'm going to go through some of the ones that I would personally recommend across the board. Starting off with the P-38G. This is a really fun aircraft. It has great performance, and it's really nice to fly. It's a little bit fragile, but it definitely makes up for that with some of its characteristics. You do have to watch the compression, but this thing has performance for days. It can keep up with a lot of aircraft at its BR. Can definitely match some of the higher BR aircraft, because this thing used to be 3.7 in one time of its life. And it is definitely something where you can have a lot of performance, have a lot of guns, but you do have a trade-off of it being rather fragile. Specifically in the tail, it is very tail fragile. A bit like the P-61 is, so to speak. But the reason why I'm choosing it over the P-38E is because this has better performance in most areas, and it's just a better aircraft to fly in terms of its overall capabilities. And of course, you do have access to some bazookas, which is always funny, because trust me, yeeting a BV with one of these bad boys is always fun. In terms of other aircraft, you can potentially look at the P-39N. Obviously, we will be covering this aircraft later down the series. And yeah, this thing is a absolute beast. What more can I say? Incredible performance, and unlike the Russian ones, it actually gets access to an almost full HE belt. And yeah, I say the Russian ones, I mean the Pukrishkins, but you know what I mean. This plane can definitely do a lot, and it is certainly something where this is probably going to be your best 2.7 / rank 2 talisman. So, yeah, it is definitely something where you can get a lot done, but obviously there is still the trade-off of having an AP round in that belt, and it is annoying. But it does make that work. Other aircraft include the P-51C-10. I don't really need to include why this aircraft needs to be here, because this thing's a monster. There's a reason why they put it down at rank 2, because everyone in mother was spamming this thing. Other aircraft include the F4U-1D, another solid aircraft, A-36 Apache, another solid aircraft with a attacker aircraft spawn, and it's basically a P-51A, so it's even better. And of course, the SP-2C4 Helldiver, which used to be rank 3, but is now rank 2. In terms of bombers, there's only one answer, the Lexington. This is a beast of an aircraft, and well, there's a reason why I even see stat padders flying this thing, because all they do is hunt condors all day long with that twin 50 on the top. And yeah, they tend to do that, and they tend to be pretty good shots, because twin 50s with mid-wall belts is definitely something to fear in this sort of BR. But yeah, personally, I would give this one a miss. This is just a plane where there are much better planes than it, and that's just how I feel about the F2A-3. I've not really fell in love with this plane. It is fun, but it's not something where I would invest GE to Talisman something like this. And yeah, like I said, the vehicles I've suggested there would personally be better. And well, there's your conclusion pretty much, and that pretty much solidifies my opinion on the F2A-3. I don't think this is a bad plane by any stretch of the imagination, but I would personally suggest one of the aircraft I've suggested there. And if you really want to narrow it down to only a couple, P-51C-10, P-38G, and probably the A-36. It'd be my top 3. And that's coming from my personal experience. Without further ado, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. I really hope you enjoyed seeing the F2A-3 Buffalo in the Should You Talisman series. Next up in the series will be the P-36G, where we're pretty much going to repeat the exact same thing. But, well, I have a bone to pick with this aircraft, and that's no fault of its own, because of these little things here. I'll explain why another time, once we get into this aircraft. Anyway, I'm going to leave you all to it for today. Hope you enjoyed seeing the F2A-3 Buffalo in this video, and I will see you all on the next one.